Hey everyone, the Revoice Conference is coming up very quickly, October 6th through the 8th. On the night of October 6th, we will be doing a live recording of our season finale, the whole Life on Side B co-host team, right after our very own Elizabeth speaks at the opening session of Revoice. We are super excited. It's going to be a great time. If you are going to Revoice, please come and join us after the main session at night. And we will have a good old time finishing out this season. Also, if you're going to be at Revoice, we are going to have some special merch that we will have for sale that will only be available at Revoice. So it's going to be a really great time. Come join us. We can't wait to see you.
Hi everyone, it's Elizabeth. Life on Side B is a ministry of posture shift, a missiological ministry equipping churches to enhance LGBTQ+ inclusion and care. You can learn more about their work at postureshift.com. We want to thank all of our patrons who keep the podcast going and growing through their continued giving. If you love this podcast, consider being a patron at patreon.com/lifeonsideb. And now on to the episode.
Hi, hello family, hello friends. Welcome back to Life on Side B. I'm here with Henry and Grant. Hello, boys.
Hello.
We were talking right before this. I think this is the first one the three of us have done together, like the boys together.
The boys.
Of the co-hosts.
Just,
the
you know,
boys.
That
cracking,
sounds so mask.
cracking a
It
conversation.
does sound very
open
masculine
with
for the
boys.
three of us.
Okay.
The three male co-hosts.
Yes.
I
I had a friend who hated when I'd say, "Hey boys," and he would be like, "I'm a man. Do not call me a boy." He would go off about it. I'm like, okay, fragile masculinity, but go off.
Okay, girl.
Okay. Damn, I should have done that. Okay. That would have been funny.
That would have been silly.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, okay, sis.
I cannot. Oh my gosh. Okay, so it's the three of us here, and we are joined by the wonderful Kristyn. Oh my gosh. Okay, I should have asked about your last name beforehand. Kristyn Komarnicki?
Komarnicki.
Okay.
Komarnicki, yeah.
I just realized I've never actually said your last name before,
yeah.
so I'm so
It's pronounced
sorry.
exactly how it looks.
Komarnicki.
And
Okay.
for some reason it stumps people.
Yeah. We're so glad that you're with us today. We're in our theme of resilience this season, talking about resilience as queer people, as Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been doing, there's 3 times when our patrons get to choose the topic. We give them 4 topics that they get to choose from. And for our last one, they picked this one. And we're going to talk about relationships across beliefs, across ideological spectrums, all of these things. How do we have resilience in our relationships when we don't agree?
Yeah.
So we're really glad to have you here. I know we're going to talk about oriented to love, throughout this whole thing, but we had thought it would be good for Henry, Grant, and I to be in it because we're the 3 co-hosts who have gone through oriented to love.
Mm-hmm.
But
you said gone through it like it was a whole struggle. We made it.
we made it.
We
It's an
survived.
ordeal of sorts.
Participated. We have participated.
Yes, we participated.
Yes, there we go. Every word counts. Every word counts. That's what I'm trying to embody. Well, Kristyn, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever you'd like to share, as well as some of your journey in this conversation of faith, sexuality, gender, all of that?
Sure. A little bit about myself and this journey, right? You want myself in the context of this journey.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I feel like as a woman who got married and then raised 3 boys, my life has been all about faith, sexuality, and gender. So I think that navigating relationships as a young adult, navigating a marriage, intimacy, the demands of family life, raising these three little creatures who were so different from me in so many ways, these three boys, asking myself, what does it mean to be a man in the world? What does it mean to be a mother of boys? I mean, there was just my feels like my whole adult life was swirling with these questions. And then in about, I don't know, 2000, maybe 15 years ago, I actually started researching pornography and doing some pornography education, looking at what pornography was, and seeing that the vast majority of it was exploitation and about domination, about using other people. So that kind of sent me into, in many ways, like a dark tunnel. I had two boys coming up on teenagehood at the time, and just started wondering, like, and also it sort of turned the light back on me as a young woman. And I thought, wow, why did I make the decisions I made in relationships? Why did, what kind of agency was I exercising? And why was that? And what was I raised to think about myself? And how did I treat myself? And it just really started bringing up a lot of questions about sexuality, about how we love people, about how we use people. And then, the context of raising boys. So that sent me on one sort of journey. And then a few years after that, my boss handed me an article that I was an editor of our magazine, the Magazine for Christians for Social Action, the organization I've been with for 24 years.
Wow.
He said, here, this is an article for the next issue. And I read it, and it was about why we were against gay marriage. And theologically, there was no news flash in there. Evangelical organization comes out against gay marriage, right? There was there didn't feel like there was any news value. But so I had a couple of reactions, but I think the deepest one was, wow, we're a bunch of straight people on staff here, and we're talking about how gay people should or shouldn't live. And it just didn't sit right with me. So at a staff meeting, I said that, and I said, at the very least, we should convene some kind of dialogue so we can get to know the people we're talking about. And at the time, honestly, I knew one gay person from my college years. I had no relationships with gay or any sexual minorities at all, or gender. So everybody sort of like cocked their heads and thought, well, that's a sensible thing she just said. And then my boss said, why don't you put something like that together? And I thought, well, I have 3 children. I'm homeschooling. I have this full-time job. I was a crazy person at the time. Wow. And I'm trying not to use the word crazy in my vocabulary anymore in that way. But anyway, it was not a very sensible period of my life. I was over-functioning big time. And so he said, take your time, put it together. And the problem was I was intrigued by the idea. I thought, what would happen if we had an intimately sized group with people across the spectrum, theologically, sexually, gender, etc. And it was a safe place for people to ask all the questions, because people are intensely curious about each other, whether theologically or sexually, or, and what would happen if we created this space? And what would that do to the dialogue in the church? And so I was intrigued, and I put it together. The first group was handpicked, and something really special happened over that weekend. And I thought, there's something going on here. And, it's a long story, but that eventually did a second one, and then multiple ones. And I'm right now preparing my 29th group.
Oh my gosh. Incredible.
Wow. What year was the first one?
The first one was 2010 or 2011. I honestly can't remember.
Yeah. One of the things that you said really struck me when people cocked their head and said, that's a sensible thing she just said. You would be surprised at how many people haven't gotten there.
Okay.
Listen to
the people we're talking about.
LGBTQ people. Yeah, like that. I mean, I'm so thankful. Thankful that you said that, and thankful that they responded in that way. That's incredible.
That's so funny, Grant. That's so true. Let's write think pieces and have seminars about people that we don't engage with.
Yeah.
So,
sure. Very smart. Yeah, I think that's. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Nope. You're.
I didn't
you're
have
up. Go
anything.
ahead.
You go.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was like, I did my Oriented to Love. I like went through an Oriented to Love retreat or like weekend.
Mhm.
When was it, Kristyn? Was it January?
It was January of this year.
That's right. It was January. And it was a really, really amazing experience. I had a really good time. And I think it was very much a growing process for me of, how to have some of these conversations when you're like having these, being able to take tools and things that I could apply to relationships back at home when I'm engaging and building relationships with people going, we don't agree, and we don't have to pretend like we agree. We don't agree, and that's fine. But being able to see the person of what led them to where they're at and all of these things. And so when we had this topic come up as a potential thing for the season, I could not think of anyone better to have in this conversation than you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thinking back to my own experience, I went through Oriented to Love. I forgot when it was, but it was during the pandemic, so it was virtual. I was holed up in my room for a weekend. I think you sent a gift package with snacks, and I was flying through those snacks. I had to replenish. But one of the things that I really loved about my experience was there were moments of like really surprising moments of agreement between people who did not expect to agree so strongly. I think there was one moment when someone said something about how like being a sexual minority or gender minority for them is not even about like not even primarily about sex. And I was like, oh my gosh, I totally agree. And we had come from like completely opposite ends of the spectrum on certain issues, but we had that one thing in common. It was really surprising and encouraging. So I think it's really beautiful, the kinds of things that can happen in these conversations. They don't magically fix all our disagreements or all our conflict or anything like that. But yeah, it's good. It's holy work. So.
Well, I think, Grant, when we see each other as complex, nuanced human beings, instead of just one label, like, oh, you're progressive, oh, he's conservative or whatever, then that's beautiful. And then those stereotypes begin to dissolve. Like you never would have guessed that person would have agreed with you. And so to be in the room when that happens is that's just magical.
Yeah.
I love that.
For sure.
Oh, Kristyn, the difficulty of putting on a virtual OTL. I'm just trying to imagine.
Wow.
I could not even imagine that.
Yeah. It was hard. It was really hard. And I resisted it for a good year and a half. But then I thought, who knows when this is going to end? And, in some ways it has some pluses because it meant that Grant could come because I've been inviting him for years now. And his schedule and his life didn't permit it. So there were some advantages, but what doesn't happen is that the deeper bonding among folks, just because you can't do that if you're not sharing the room.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, because there was a lot of amazing moments that I shared just when it's like when you're eating dinner or you're walking around or whatever.
So there's to have that.
Yeah.
You can do it again, Grant.
Yes, but you need to go again.
Just trying to emote through a video was hard enough. I was like, I was trying to be like empathetic and to like show that. And I just kept nodding my head a lot, which like it doesn't do enough. I don't know how to.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Henry, you were going to say something?
No, when I went through, it was summer 19 or 18. I had my Honda.
2019.
19, okay, that's when I went, And I picked up this guy who's also coming from Texas, a side B guy, Catholic guy. And so I was like, well, if he's going to take the bus, I was like, I can just pick him up. He lives 45 minutes away from me. So I pick up this random stranger, and John is the sweetest soul. But his life is like the complete opposite of mine. He was like at the time, like living with friends who were fixing up their house. So he was just camping out in the backyard in this tent. And he just loved it and was like, owns a flip phone. Like, I mean, he is just like so funny. But so we had, like, the only thing I knew about him was his name and some of the bio from the prep work we'd done. So I'm just like, I'm about to get in a car with this random man who could be a serial killer, I don't know, to drive 15 hours to Chicago overnight, because I picked him up at like 8 p.m. And we just like, so by the time we just ended up bonding super well. And by the time I got there, I felt like I had this lifeline, because I was nervous about like, oh my gosh, what if all these views just clash and people don't like each other?
Mm-hmm.
But like I had like the safety net built into him being there, and so that was sweet. And then just as the weekend kept progressing and like the questions and talks get a little bit more intense, we're like, okay, how's this gonna go? But like with being in the same room with them, because there was someone at my OTL who, I mean, I know, oh, that girl did not like me just because I guess. But I get it, because I was theologically coming down probably harder than I would now about certain things. But even then, by the end of it, we still happened to, we found this like, yeah, she didn't like me when we started. But by the end of it, we've managed to find this like common ground of a base level of friendship and interaction. And so we'll text every once in a while, either in our group or just even outside of the group or Facebook. But I was like, when I went into that weekend, I had not thought that kind of friendship would be possible, which was odd, because I have progressive friends, like we were saying, right, or whatever, but I'd never have to like sit in a deep weekend theological conversation with them and vice versa. And like Kristyn was saying, and see them as more than just this label of like, you're either progressive or liberal or this, but like, no, you are a deeply nuanced person. So
yeah.
You know, you were you Henry and Grant, you were teasing Josh about using the expression "gone through" like it was an ordeal. But honestly, it's not an easy thing to go through.
No,
it isn't. It's not. It is an undertaking, and it requires a lot of participants. And you know, I always say, the group that applies for an OTL weekend is a self-selecting group of people who are willing to walk towards a weekend of discomfort, because there is a lot of discomfort, and a lot of us spend a lot of time avoiding discomfort at all costs.
Yeah, that's true.
No, I know for my situation, it was like especially crazy, because literally as I walked into the Oriented to Love situation, I had a family emergency happen, like literally as I was walking in the doors. And I remember going, I don't have the emotional capacity to deal with both of these. And I was so afraid that it was going to make me just like snap at people throughout the weekend. But I think, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to become the biggest bitch of this week. And I think one of the most beautiful things that happened was the ways that people from everyone in the group really came around, as I just shared at the beginning. I was like, I'm just letting you all know, I just got this news. I'm processing this news. And it was really sweet to see how people just really came around and continually connected and cared for me, even in the midst of us having these really deep conversations. And I think that there was something beautiful about that for me. Yeah. Henry, were you going to say something? I feel like I kind of cut you off.
I forgot.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, no. So yeah, we were in Chicago for mine. And so like I had Greg Webb and Daniel Stark around. And so like I got to like, at least like, even though the weekend was intense, I'd be like at night, I could like debrief or process with like people who weren't in the building, which that also helped too.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of to start a little of this conversation, Kristyn, I would love for you to speak into, as you've gone through these dialogues, because now you're in, what did you say, 23? 29 of them. What are some of the things you have found that have been like the biggest barriers that keep people from forming or maintaining relationships across ideological, spectrums?
Well, we just mentioned the one, which is fear of discomfort. Or I want to say sometimes it's fear. Just fear.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it is discomfort, because we all know that people are out there, and people are even in here, right, in our own families that we disagree with. Anyone who's lived in family or community or been part of a church knows that disagreement is, they understand, right? Disagreement is a part of life. But there's something about some of these more core issues that are so intensely personal to people, which I think our sexuality, our gender, and our faith all meet that criteria. Intensely personal, intensely intimate. That we somehow feel threatened when others hold different views.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of barriers, I guess if I back up a minute, I think one of the biggest barriers is feeling like the most important thing is to get this right, is to find the right doctrine or the right theology, when in fact I believe that the most important thing is to trust God, is to and be in conversation, be in dialogue with God, and oneself and one's community.
Yeah.
But when we are stressing on getting things right, then we don't have a lot of energy or patience or compassion for those who come to different conclusions than we do. And honestly, we don't have a lot of patience or compassion even for ourselves. We just focus on getting things right, as opposed to looking at life like this is a process. We are discovering who we are as we go. We are inviting God into this conversation. Let's invite more people into the conversation, and let's consider all possibilities. Let's ask hard questions. Let's ask what if questions. What if this is true? Then what? What if that is true? Then what follows from that? And just stretching our legs and getting excited about being in a conversation, as opposed to feeling like I have a little checklist here and I just want to make sure I get it all right, because if I get something wrong, I'm somehow in trouble. And I don't know, it might have, I'm not a theologian, and I'm also not a church historian, but I feel like somewhere along the way, especially evangelicalism, right, sort of lost touch with mystery and the real requirements of community, which is to hold our truth with an open hand. It doesn't require us to give up our convictions or how we understand to be the truth, what we understand to be the truth, but it does require us to hold these things with an open hand so that we can connect with other people.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's good, especially because whenever we're in these places of, like Kristyn was saying, we don't really want to have our thoughts or beliefs questioned, because I think we have this fear of like, well, what if like I listen to someone else and then my mind changes, and then it's like, well, then that's a great thing if you learn. But like, we're almost like afraid to like be challenged, because like the change would be uncomfortable if like something we long held or believed turned out to be, oh, well, maybe that's not everything that I thought or knew. So
Yeah.
I found that interesting.
I think like along those lines, Henry, like I think that when we are fear, especially of having relationships with people across ideological spectrums, many times that fear can be, if I see this person as human, will that automatically change my beliefs? Like if I see this person as more than the spectrum, this fear that somehow is going to change. Like I can't see people that disagree with me as people, and still believe that they're wrong. You know, and understand that things led them to their conclusions. Because like I have very dear friends in my life that we completely, like, even take the sexuality conversation on it. They're not Christian. Like they do not hold anything of Christian beliefs. They do not even use that term to describe themselves. And it's so funny because we're so close that many times people are like, oh, your differences are not important. I'm like, oh no, I legitimately think he's wrong and he thinks I'm wrong. Yeah. And we will tell that to each other. It literally does not change the fact that we think the other is wrong. But I would go to bat on anyone who went after him, you know, because I know the amazing person that he is and what has led him to where he's at.
I mean, that to me is almost like, on one hand, to me, it's almost easier to have those conversations and relationships with non-believers versus believers who believe different things on that spectrum. Because it's like, that tension isn't there.
Yeah.
And I mean, I enjoy non-believers more than believers for the most part anyways lately. That's another topic. So...
Yeah. Well, I honestly would say I kind of fall into that sometimes. Is like I find that I struggle sometimes more with engaging with other Christians, that and there might be something about that says about myself, but also falling into that connecting. Well, no, I'm just saying is that it could be a lot of different things in
Yeah.
that. But I relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that, Kristyn, you touched on something something about evangelicalism. I mean, this is true to a certain extent of all Christian traditions. And as one who grew up evangelical and had a mostly positive experience, I'm not trying to trash evangelicalism at all, but in my experiences of like living in the evangelical tradition, there's a way in which I was like encouraged to feel to brace myself against people who believed differently, to like my own moral fortitude may have been judged by how strongly I reacted against what I was taught was error. And it feels so ingrained. How do you help people to deal with that kind of like survival instinct that it feels so natural, and like it feels like an evolutionary response, like we've been confronted with a threat, and we just have to like get bigger and like, I don't know, seem really strong and steel, and how do you process through that? How do you help people process through that instinct?
Well, I think a helpful first step is just to recognize that there are real threats, right? There are real risks. Henry, you were saying, what if I change my mind? When you change your mind, there are consequences.
Yeah.
Yes.
And sometimes those consequences for people in the faith world is losing their job.
Yeah.
And sometimes the consequences is, your family rejects you. And that could be from both sides, right? That can be from the very liberal or the very conservative, right? Whatever it is. There are friendships at risk. There are relationships. There are jobs. There are sometimes it's if a young person, for example, who's dependent on his parents, it can make the difference between having a roof over their heads or finishing their studies.
Yeah.
So there are real risks to changing our minds, depending on who we're relating with. If everybody is sort of willing to take that risk together, then it's different. But that's almost never the case. Sorry. So I think just starting out by acknowledging that the risks are real is helpful. I find that I spend a lot of time when I'm prepping groups for the dialogue, just sort of front loading all of these emotions, right? I know that some of you are feeling afraid. I know that some of you are feeling really anxious right now. And when I'm feeling afraid or anxious, I usually just announce it, like in a public setting. I usually start by confessing whatever I'm feeling, and that discharges a lot of that anxiety. But I can't remember what your question was, Grant.
How do you help people like overcome or process through a fight or flight or freeze instinct?
Right. Well, in the context of the dialogue, which is the thing I have the most experience with, but I think this applies broadly. I would say practicing radical hospitality, which means that you care for people. When they are expressing their anxiety to you, or you see what they're going through, you just care for them. You say, I see you, I hear you, this looks really hard, a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy. How can I help? And whatever you're going through, it's okay. I'm here for you. And we need to do that for ourselves too. And part of that is finding people who will treat us with that kind of compassion. Because when you're in lizard brain, I think they call it, you can't make good decisions. You can't remain open to other people. You can't take risks. Yeah. So I think we just really need to make sure we have people around us who we can process with. Henry, you said that while you were at the dialogue, you had outside people to process with. That's enormous. One of the exercises leading up to the dialogue is to build your own prayer team, right? So there are people out there who are specifically praying for you in this conflictual situation. They're there. You can turn to them if you need them. All of that is really valuable.
Yeah. That's so good.
That's a really good point, because I know, like, for me, a few times when I've been in, like, as a side B person, specifically like entering more dominantly side A, spaces, maybe a QCF conference or something like that, it has intentionally been important to go with other side B people that in those moments when I'm like, I'm just overloaded by having these conversations constantly that I need to retreat and be with people that I don't have to have this intense, gap of, such, difference in this moment about, because our minds can only take so much at times, and also when we're talking about friends, it's not like we have to be talking about our differences constantly either. But like when we're talking about like deep, close friends and stuff, but even like when I have found myself in those kind of spaces where I'm like, okay, I'm in a minority in this context right now. Great to be here. Also need to step away for a second and find support among people like myself in order to then have the energy to come back and enter these really difficult situations and contexts and things like that as well.
And I'll also say that it's good to remember that if I'm feeling threatened by you, you are also probably feeling threatened by me. I am the source of discomfort for you as much as you are a source of discomfort for me across deep difference. And I know if you guys will probably remember that one of the exercises we do before a dialogue is to pick somebody in the group who most ups your anxiety level and then to pray for that person. You don't tell them, you just start praying for them. And somebody was just sharing with me that they loved that exercise. Oh, it was really easy for them to pick somebody who, upped their anxiety level, or they felt as, or just bothered them or got their hackles up, whatever. But it didn't occur to him until afterwards that someone had picked him to pray for, and he was like, "Oh wow, I'm also the source of somebody's irritation." So I think just normalizing that, and that is already a point of common ground, right? Between folks across deep difference.
Oh, that's so good. I think holding someone in prayer is a kind of intimacy with them. Like that you're contemplating them in God, and you're both in God. That's just so good. I might have to start doing that because lots of people make me anxious.
Okay.
We just had a really good episode with Wes Hill and John Stark specifically on prayer. And I love how that kind of builds on that idea of like when we're in this intimate moment of God and we're praying specifically for another person, like you can't not see the image of God in someone in that moment. You can't like not do so in that, or at least, if your heart is in the right place in that way. But like, being able to hold someone in prayer, that's a really, really, really great point.
There's some really powerful, I guess I would call them visualization meditations, where you visualize bringing that person into the presence of Christ and you are observing them in the room with Christ. There's some really beautiful meditations that you can do. And then the other thing that we do is I don't just tell people like pray for that person. The questions are, how can I be of service to this person? How can I pray for this person, Lord?
Yeah.
How can I be a part of them realizing their hopes at the dialogue? How can I be a servant in prayer to them? So it's like you're really entering in. It's not just like, oh Lord, bless them or
bless their
help
heart.
them not to bother me.
Yeah.
Bless their hearts.
Or you pray
It's
for
more
them going,
like,
bless them, help them know that they are wrong. No,
Go reveal the truth. Okay?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, like entering with a humility within it of like, how can I be of service in this? Not just how, in like praying from a place of service rather than power in this kind of thing.
Praying for others as you would like them to pray for you.
Oh,
right.
Yes.
Ooh, that's double
gosh.
scripture. That's double scripture.
Come on,
That
Lord's
is-
Prayer
I'm
and
just-
Wow. Yeah.
she's on it.
Yes. I'm trying to think of where, like, I just think there's so much power in that can help us, because I feel like in this point in time, take away even the sexuality conversation, it's so difficult to not find someone that you're in relationship with across ideological, spectrums. It's so difficult not to point to one where I'm like, oh yeah, there's no like major point of disagreement. Obviously there are. And I think that when we find ourselves in this constant thing of, wow, there's all these people that I hold dear, but yet we share all of these very different divides in them. I mean, that comes from family, it comes from major friends, from church. Like, I go to a church where there's a wide spectrum of belief on sexuality and gender, and just being like, these are the people I go to church with, and we're supposed to be a faith, family, and yet we hold all of these differences. And how to be able to have that resilience, as we're talking about that resilience this season, we're talking about that, but how to have this resilience both in my own emotional life, as well as my relationships, as well as my faith, to understand that God is carrying me through this in the midst of uncertainty. And going back to, Kristyn, what you talked about with that mystery of understanding, I don't have to have all of the answers. I don't have to have everyone else have all of the answers either. To still have the foundation of truth being founded in God and certainty founded in God, even in the midst of mystery. I feel like that goes back I'm calling back all of these different episodes we've done this season, like the one on doubt and deconstruction that you, Grant, you did with Becca and Johanna Marie Williams. That was so good, of this being able to have certainty in God, even in the midst of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Both, but I think that applies even when we're in these relationships across spectrums.
For sure.
That wasn't necessarily a question, but just me processing what we've shared so far in all of this. We've surprisingly gotten to a lot of the questions that I had written up for this time, except for the one at the end. Henry and Grant, do any questions initially come up for you in this?
Yes.
Okay, Grant. Yeah.
No, you can go first, Henry.
Okay. And this is okay. Because I asked Greg Webb this a lot. We talked about it before, because he has very, very, very close side A friends.
Yes.
And I have, I just went to lunch with a dear friend of mine today for our birthdays, and he owns a venue in Fort Worth that I do a lot of work at. And so he mentioned a while back to me that an affirming church was meeting there. And we've talked about my faith. It's not a big part of what we talk about, but he certainly knows my faith in my life. And he's Jewish, but he's like, I host an affirming church twice a month here. And I'm like, okay. And he invited me a couple months ago, and I was like, that's just not my cup of tea, but and then I happened to be out of town, so I kind of got away with that. And then so he mentioned it at lunch today. He's like, I think they're meeting this evening. You should go. And then I was just like, I don't attend affirming churches. I don't mind visiting one, but I don't want to step in that conversation and thereby cause tension. And that once they ask me what my thoughts are, then I immediately land into that And so I was like, I'd rather just avoid that kind of thing. And then he's like, so what do you think about affirming churches? Do you think that they're living in sin and those people are living in sin?
I'm this was
girl, and I'm just trying to drink. And I was just trying to drink my miso soup. Okay, and I'm just and I'm like, I did not want to have this conversation at lunch. Certainly did not prepare to have it today. But then I guess my long-winded way of asking that is my friend asks, he's like, do you think that they're living in sin, or do you think that you're living in sin? And I was like, well, if I had a sex life, I'd maybe consider that, but I don't. So, but he asked it that way, and I was like, why is that where we're going? But he's just then he's like, are you a red letter Christian? And I was just literally, I was not expecting that conversation. But obviously, he is not a theologically conservative person. But at the end of at that lunch, my friend and I have this conversation. One person, you can't get away from the fact that one person inherently believes that somebody's wrong and somebody's right. And Greg does that well with his friends, but I'm just it's so, it goes back to the it's so uncomfortable thing, because it's you don't want to, through your life, juxtaposed against theirs, you're telling someone you think they're wrong. And so, how do you reconcile that? Or any just thoughts on my very long-winded question? That was more of a statement, I guess.
You can tell that a lot of these questions flow out of our experiences trying to navigate this ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Well-
that's why this episode, I
So
think,
like
was
I
just
have
like...
a friend who
Well, and before
And
you
my-
answer, Krista, go ahead.
And I was like, well, this just happened 3 hours ago. I was like, well, if nothing, this is great material for this podcast today.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and to add on to that, before you talk, Kristen, is I was thinking about this. I think with these kinds of situations, it's also not always a fear of or discomfort of what happens if my mind changes, but also sometimes a thing of like, what if in order to be in relationship with this person, I have to like not hold my belief as strongly, kind of thing. Because sometimes there's this thing of, like, for instance, for me, like many times because of the amount of side A or non-Christian queer people in my life, many times some people locally for me will think that my traditional belief is not very important to me.
yes.
And I'm like, oh no, it's very important to me.
Yes.
It's literally like how I embody my existence of faith through celibacy and stuff. It's still very important to me, but people will interpret my relationships in that as like, oh, well, you don't really see that as that's not important to you. I'm like, no, it's still very important, but I can understand why people would feel like that. Anyway, just to kind of
I
build
mean,
on
and
that.
I feel that way. I mean, this relationships that I do have, to just be candid, that I'm just like, my faith probably might seem downplayed around them just because I'm like, okay, if I'm going to have a cordial friendship or anything with this person, I can't be as intense as I normally would be. Oh, people can't see me doing quotation marks, but anyways, air quotes. But so that's when I said intense, that's what I did. But yeah, so now we just asked you a 3-part question.
We just asked you like a 3-part question.
I will just respond with the thoughts that are in my head right now.
Okay, perfect.
Go ahead.
I remember years ago, my brother telling me that he says, I refuse to answer questions when people say, so do you think that, babies in China who have never heard about Jesus are going to hell? Those kinds of questions, which are really trap questions. They're not questions that are looking for deeper understanding. They're sort of global. They want global, quick, categories. And he really impressed me with his comeback. And he's like, you know what? I'm not a baby in China who hasn't heard about Jesus, but I'm happy to talk to you about who Jesus is to me. So that was like a witnessing question, right?
Ooh.
And so when your lunch mate, Henry, says to you, so do you think that those people are living in sin? The real question is this is a great segue to my deepest passion, which is questions.
Yeah.
Great questions, open-ended, compassionately curious questions, which I think are the answer to the world's problems, I think. Is the real question would be, Henry, what does it mean to you to live into celibacy? What does it mean to you? What does your understanding of what God is calling to you sexually mean to you? Now, that's a beautiful question that you might be willing, maybe not at lunch. It depends on how much time you have or whatever.
Can I finish my
But
miso
that's
soup?
And how many?
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's an invitation, right? That's a beautiful, that's an open door that you want to go into and explore this whole other land that he's inviting you into. But people do not know, this is a global statement, 99% of the people that I meet do not know how to ask that kind of question. And I'm starting to think that it might be an act of kindness on our parts to say something along the lines, that question that you just asked, it doesn't get my juices flowing. I really can't speak to that. But if you were to ask me this and you actually give them the gift of modeling a great question, now that's a question I'd be interested in answering. And I'd really, I'd love to spend some time. So that's actually, you're not saying that's a stupid question, but you're offering a better question.
Yeah.
And then they can say, well, I'm not interested in hearing that question. And that may be the case and end of conversation. But you know what? You're not interested in answering that first question.
Yes.
And you have the right to not go there. We
I
are
love
not
it being
obligated
direct.
to answer the questions that people ask us. But it is a gift when we craft a beautiful question and put it on the table.
That's so good.
That was good.
I 100% agree with you that so many of the world's problems would be solved by being able to ask honoring questions, being able to entreat. Like, it's been a practice I've been trying to do more of when I find someone that makes me uncomfortable, initiating with questions about their life. and asking questions to maybe understand a little bit more of what led them to where they're at, you know, like what has brought them to the context that they find themselves in, or the belief that they hold, and all of these things, rather than jumping to what I would assume has led them there, or what, you know, or I might even know it, but I have been learning that as well in such really big ways, and have found so many so much power in questions, especially good, honoring questions, as you said, Kristyn. That's really great.
I love that.
Something new, a new thought that I've sort of added to my thinking around questions is we should ask questions that we would also be willing to answer. Because I think a lot of times our questions are can be prying, or I mean, a question that you're not really willing to engage with is just exploitative. You know, it's so.
That's good.
You know, am I willing to go there with my story? Am I willing to, you know, offer that back to this person if he or she or they decide to reverse the direction?
Yeah.
So I think that's just really important.
Yeah.
We were talking about that this morning when we were interviewing someone else. And it's like when people want to come up to you about your sex life or your faith or your theological positions and ask you inappropriate questions, it's like, oh, I'll turn one around back and ask you one. And like, if you're willing to go there, I will. Like, I have a friend, like, whenever pastors are like, so we want to know, like, how are you going to steward your sex? And he'll, like, your sex life. And he'll turn around and ask the pastor, great, I'll answer that if we can talk about how you're stewarding your sex life. And it's just always like, you see what the person's intention, or if they'll go there with you, or if they're just like, never mind.
Never mind.
Yes. I've gotten that when I've redirected. I've gotten that a couple of times.
That is
it's
telling.
true.
That is telling.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you talked about that, Kristyn, because that's a really important point. Because we can ask open-ended questions, things that we think are honoring, but then it can be something of like, why we would not want to answer that about our own life. So why would we do that? I've gotten questions like that so often about my own chosen family, where people are asking stuff. I'm like, would you ask this to anyone else in any other context? I cannot.
Yeah.
And having to ask that to myself when I ask questions.
Were you going to say something, Kristyn?
Well, I was going to ask if I actually have a question for you.
I was going to leave space
100%,
for that. Please do.
yeah.
Great. Well, so I have a huge soft spot. I don't know if that's the right term, but a concern specifically for side B queer folks. And because I work with some side B queer folks in every group, and I feel that I've noticed that over the years that I think you folks bear the greatest brunt of the weight of the conversation. And I understand why that is. I understand how you're sort of a unicorn, no matter where, who's looking at you, right? And you just take heat from both sides. I mean, the launch of Revoice was, a case study of that, right? So I'm so glad that you all have space at Revoice where you can be in community and share that without a lot of outside voices. But in the context of the dialogue, I'm always looking to make sure that the side B queer folks are being supported in the way that they deserve to be, that you deserve to be. Now, I don't know what your individual experiences were like at the dialogue, but I do sometimes hear from people that it feels less safe there for them as side B queer Christians. And of course, my greatest desire is for you all to be held as much as, if not more so, because I sometimes see the need to be greater than the rest of the group. So I'd love to hear ways that you didn't feel safe, ways that we can improve the dialogue that would take that into account, if my premise resonates with you.
Oh gosh,
that's a really good question. What'd you say, Henry?
I just said Josh. I was volunteering you to go first.
Oh, you're volunteering me? Okay, cool. Yeah, I would say that overall, I would say especially from you, from Darren Calhoun, who was the other I can't remember his title in the conversation.
Spiritual companion.
Spiritual companion. I felt very, I would say I definitely felt very cared for. I felt like there was intentionality in that.
Yeah.
I definitely would say I had a few times where I felt a little nervous to share my thought. I don't think that came from you or from Darren, but just there were some times where everyone was talking and kind of agreeing about something, for instance, maybe about the Bible or something. And I'm like, I really don't agree, but it feels like everyone else agrees. And I think on top of that, just because I was dealing with the family emotional stuff, I was like, I don't have the energy to be the only one who, doesn't agree. So I kind of more stayed quiet. I would be very intrigued to know, like, if I hadn't had the family kind of stuff going on, would I have spoken up? Would I have, like, shared my thought in that moment? But I think that naturally comes, sometimes when people start sharing a thought, other people build on it. And then when you have a lot of people sharing it, if you disagree, you're just, I don't think that was anything about oriented to love. I would say in my place, in my certain context, I think that I felt supported, but I think something that maybe helped me that I would say maybe doesn't help most Side B people is, like, my church does, I've talked about it before on the podcast, story groups, which is a very oriented to love dialogue formatted thing, not on sexuality, but one person shares a story and everyone just has to listen, not fix, and all of that. So I think that maybe the context of my church helped prepare me for an oriented to love conversation that I think that a lot of maybe Side B people don't have in their everyday life to also be prepared for that kind of context in a way. But the last thing I will say, well, I'll give you all a little one last thing. I think that maybe another reason why those kind of contexts can be really hard for Side B people is I think that many times one of the things that helps going into those contexts is normally you're coming from that into that context. And Grant and Henry, tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I think that those kind of contexts where you're with people that disagree, those can be a lot better when you're coming from, like, in your general life, you're around people that agree with you. Like, affirming people generally live or can exist around other affirming people generally. Not always. And more conservative straight people exist around other people that agree with them. Side B people rarely do. We rarely exist in our everyday life around people that support.
That is good.
That, like, you can at least know, hey, I'm going into this dialogue, but tomorrow I'm going home to people that, like, are my safe net that agree with me. I would say majority of Side B people I know do not exist in that realm. They exist in spaces where they're already disagreeing, where they're already not supported by their local community. So I think it can add the tension on what is already in their local context, which from my experience with affirming people going into it, or conservative straight people that go into it, they get to go back home to people that already 100% agree with them. And I would say in my experience, that's another where I'm very different from Side people because I do have a supporting local community. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah.
I like that.
I wonder too, like, I also had a similar experience in that I felt very supported, and I felt as safe as one could feel in a space where you're talking about really controversial topics held close to the chest. But something that I'm thinking about now is, like, a lot of Side B people are always in environments where they're uncomfortable. like in our churches, oftentimes there's, like, this tension, like, do people really know me on the one hand, or do people disagree with me, or do people want to ask me invasive questions, that sort of thing. And then in our relationships with people who believe differently than us, Side A people, there's this tension, like, I love you so much. We disagree on something so profound. We know we bear in our ourselves the tension that is. And so I think for me, I wanted to come into the dialogue, and I already feel uncomfortable all the time. So like I'm already uncomfortable. I wanted to make sure that that tension wasn't too quickly resolved. Like I think I was afraid that in having a conversation, like the group might settle too quickly on a sort of um, a simple solution that's like everyone believes differently, but we're all fine, sort of thing. But I wanted people to take that tension seriously, and so I think that was what I was most concerned about in the group. So when there were moments where it was like, oh yeah, we can all believe these different things, and like, and it just felt too simple. I was like, no, but this tears me up inside. Don't you, like
That.
this is this has torn me up inside my entire life. Like
Yeah.
I recently had a conversation with one of my friends who's side A now, used to be side B. Um, two different conversations where we professed our undying love for each other, and also our deep conviction that the other is dead wrong on something. And like we don't know how to deal with that. We're just gonna keep going forward, and we love each other, but like I don't want to blur over that tension and just say everything is fine. Because like
Yeah.
I have a I have this tension that I keep with me everywhere. You know, I don't know if I'm just sort of rambling
Yeah.
now.
No.
Yeah,
I
it's a
think,
tension that your entire life embodies. So it's a
Yeah.
serious thing.
Yeah.
yeah. Because the last thing I'll connect to what you said, Grant, is when you even talk about the church aspect, there's one thing I really adamantly believe. There are traditional believing churches, but I still do not know, maybe locally there are some, but there are not many side B churches, in the sense of churches that hold to a traditional view and thrive and like
Yeah.
still allow for the thriving of queer people, which I always tell churches, you are not side B because you hold to a traditional view on marriage. You are side B when you can hold the tension of allowing for queer people to thrive in that. And so I think because of that, it's so hard for side
Yeah.
B people to find a church where they can just exist. But anyway,
Well,
that's a whole nother conversation, but
Yeah.
holding to that tension.
That's another thing too, is like sometimes dialogues, like one of the ways that we're split up is we get to connect with people who like have the same theological perspective as us. But I do not necessarily feel safe in those places. Like
That part. Okay. Bitch, we might believe the same thing, but that's where this starts and ends. Okay.
I mean, like,
Mm.
I'm fine. I can handle, like, everyone's there because they want to have this conversation. But like, just because for all of us share the belief that same-sex sex is off the table, does not mean that
Yeah.
we agree on much more than that.
And that part. And if you only agree with me because as a queer person, I am in agreement with what you think theologically, and you would not like give, but if you only care about me because I happen to agree with you, and you would not give the same level of care or love to a non or an affirming queer person, then no, you're not safe for me as a queer person either. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Whew, that was good, Grant. Okay, it's like that's where it starts and ends. Okay, that's where it starts and ends. And conclusion. Okay.
Cool, but like cool. We agree on one point of doctrine, but like, do you hate me still? Like, it just, like I don't know where to place you still. I mean, I'm sure
Okay.
none of the people hated me. Like my OTL experience was so good. Like I had such a good time with everyone. But yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I was definitely talking about Christians in general, not OTL. But
Yeah.
I think everyone at OTL that went in generally did come in with the I want to learn and I want to be vulnerable and I'm willing to open up myself to this. And I think for me it was interesting where I was at that year. I was 3 months, because I was July, so I was 2 months away from leaving my church of 5 years at the time. And where I'd already just had like some I've been side-eyeing evangelicals for about 4 years at that whole point in time. But
All this talk about side A, side B, but we really need to talk about side eyeing.
okay.
Side-eyeing.
Oh, did Henry?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was like, did Henry get cut out? Okay.
That was good. No, that was good. But but I think I was coming from this, like, even while I theologically believe the same things I believed 4 years ago, my lens of how or 3 years ago when I did OTL, how I express it, how much more gentle I am with it, and how like much more room I hold for other people is less combative than it was at OTL. Because I think instinctively, aside be people, what Kristyn was saying, like, we do come in with probably like more to risk or whatever in these spaces or lose, because I think it can feel like the burden is on us to like make sure that people leave that, okay, I understand where they're coming from and like we have more to prove, versus like someone who isn't. And so that's what I felt. And I don't know how to mitigate that. Maybe on the front end, having some more clarity around, this is not a come defend your position. Side B people, like, you don't have to do this. And side A people, do not make side B people feel like they have to defend their existence and their belief, versus, hey, let's just learn from them. Because I don't know if you remember, Kristyn, but that Saturday when me and a fellow dialoguer were just like kind of going in a back and forth, we had to take a break, y'all, before we came back to the circle. We were like, okay, let's take a break, go like take a lap around the building or whatever I did, and then come back. And so I think that's what I would say was the only time that I was just like, I feel like I am sitting here and I absolutely have to like defend myself to the death. And part of that could be just because from the background I was coming from. And part of that, I don't know if that was a dialogue. I wouldn't say that. But I think in that moment, I was just like, oh my gosh, why did I come to this? And then I was so glad I did the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was, I would do OTL again. That's how I always measure something.
Sure.
I'm like, would I do it again? And I'm just like, yes.
Yeah. I for me, the hard part is I don't really know with the areas of where I could see side B people having really nervousness or discomfort with oriented to love situations. I don't really know of a lot that could be mitigated on your end,
True,
Kristyn, because you guys do a lot.
That's
I mean,
true.
you really do
So much.
Like, the only thing I could say that could maybe be something to work on is, I love what Grant was talking about, is allowing that tension to exist. You know, being like, yeah, this tension, it's real, and we can't really get around it, that we disagree. Like, which I'm not saying that didn't happen. But I think in some ways it allows the honoringness of, like, for side B people, the tension that we literally live in is like being honored in the fact of like, it's important, the fact that we disagree. Mm-hmm. But I really think I'm amazed by how much intentionality you and the team put into really making space for everyone in the dialogue.
I 100% agree.
Like, boys, can y'all imagine if we went into that dialogue with all that prep, and then like, oh my gosh, that would be like being thrown into the wolves.
Yes.
Like, if you just went in and try to have that conversation over 3 days, oh my God, that would be a nightmare.
Yeah. I do have to say, I really do encourage side B people listening, if you're interested in this, do it. Go do
Absolutely.
Oriented to Love. Be prepared for the prep work.
Well, I also think that
but no, as a good thing, Kristyn, I'd say
just one assignment a week. Just one.
I think
brief assignment for 8 weeks. That's all.
It was doable. And I do think that side B people might be one of the kinds of people most unlikely to pursue this kind of dialogue, because it's really like you're going to be put in the middle of people who disagree with you for various reasons.
On both sides.
And I'm sure everyone feels like that. I think, like, for lots of reasons, that feels especially acute for side B folks. But I would encourage side B people to pursue this dialogue, and I mean, they can chat with some of us who've gone through it. But yeah.
I feel that like a thing like Oriented to Love is really helpful because we're not going to, as we said, we have so many disagreements in our own lives. We can't get away from it as side B people. I feel like a very guarded, protected space like Oriented to Love actually helps build resilience for having these dialogues later on, in many ways, because you have people like yourself, Kristyn, and this kind of stuff of being able to go, how do I practice that muscle of talking to people that I disagree with?
For sure.
I think for me is kind of what I wanted to get out of it. And I do believe I did.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, thanks for the feedback, guys. That's helpful.
I did have maybe an especially tender question for you, Kristyn. One that's,
sure,
I guess, one that's close to my heart. And I think there's so much, honestly, there's a lot of pain behind it. And I know that you're a very safe person. And so I feel totally comfortable asking. But when I'm thinking about like some of the pain in relationships across ideological lines that side B people go through, happens when either we have close friends who change their mind, close side B friends who change their mind. Sometimes it feels like side B can be a bit of a thoroughfare instead of a destination. Like people come here to go somewhere else. And to be clear, like people come to side B to get more conservative and to get more progressive. I've seen both. But so we have close friends who are formerly side B and who are in a different place now. But maybe even specifically, the most pain that I've experienced in relationships across ideological lines is those who have gotten more conservative, who have left side B spaces and felt like become less open to the possibility of identifying with queer culture, or like things like that. And in those situations, it can sometimes feel like the obstacles are just insurmountable and relationship is impossible. Or the pain is just so much in every conversation. It can be. I'm lucky to have a lot of friends in different ideological places than me where there's not that tension all the time, and I love them and it's easy. But I guess it's sort of unformed, but when obstacles seem insurmountable, when relationship with another person seems just impossible because there's too much pain, what advice do you have? What is there a moment where you have to stop? Is like, how do you manage distance? Are there levels of relationship that are open to you? Like that sort of thing. Unformed, completely unformed, but.
No, I hear where you're coming from. And I think that it's a great question. I think that whether we think they exist or not, there are different levels of relationship that we have, right? Mm-hmm. There's the people that we break our daily bread with, and there's the people that we get a Christmas card from, right? And I think that the pain is when one relationship shifts to a lesser, to an outer, moves to an outer circle.
Yeah.
But I think part of loving people well is being willing to let them go. And a lot of relationships, you just notice over time, oh, wow, we don't get together like we used to. Who's responsible for that? Have they been calling me and I've been blocking their calls or ignoring them? Have I dropped the ball? Have they dropped the ball? Was it a mutual thing? And I think if we're really a relationally driven person, I'm relationally driven, sometimes we can be really hard on ourselves and say, oh, I have to keep up every relationship. And that's not really realistic. I guess my theory is that relationships tend to sort of find their place. I don't know why I'm thinking of a wheel, but or wheels within wheels, right? Isn't that like a revelation?
Another biblical reference. Look at you. Yeah.
Look at this.
And sometimes those relationships will skip and move in or out, but I think being willing to let a relationship be what it is. You can't force it to be something that it isn't. You can't force a level of comfort or a desire. Like, I should want to see Bob, every weekend. Well, you know what? I don't. And I'm really having a great time with Sue and John. It's like we tend to sometimes want to control our relationships and our feelings. So I think it's fine to give space to relationships. And I just think it's a reality. Like, there's only 24 hours in a day. And, I don't know. I have a friend who she says, I move towards relationship to the extent that people want it. And you can't want more than they want, So if it's causing a high level of discomfort, I think having a conversation about it and just being vulnerable and saying, I miss you. But it's too painful for me to be in this. And just, you might reach a whole nother level of conversation if you're willing to take that risk of vulnerability and saying, this is how this feels to me. I feel abandoned, or I feel that I'm abandoning you. I love you, but I have relationships like this right now in my life. Like, wow, you have become so distant to me that I'm like, we've lost a previous intimacy. And so I'm actually bored with you. Like, that's a really hard thing to say. And I have not said that yet in this relationship that I'm thinking of. Or just, let's have a coffee date. And I think I'm going to say that. And then there's something else is re-sparked because, they offer me some level of intimacy and vulnerability. I'm like, oh, we're back again. So I think relationships are in flux. I guess that's the short way of putting it. And we shouldn't try to control them to be something that they're not. It's two people involved. So
and Grant, I definitely wanted to add to that when you asked that question, because I went through, arguably outside of like losing someone, like in terms of death, but the most heartbreak I went through was a couple years ago when my closest friend and I, it got to a point to where we just could not be friends anymore. We were trying, and like we loved each other or not, and we were just like solid brothers in Christ. And then like the relationship just got to this place where like it was hurting both people to continue staying, but we were trying to make it work and like trying to figure out how to love each other well. But like what's the point where we're arguing and we don't even know why we're actually arguing or what's going on in this dynamic anymore. So finally I just had to be like, and both of us had to be like, we can't do this anymore. And it was like, I mourned that friendship. And when, like Kristyn was saying, relationship takes two people. It takes two to... And so, but eventually, after some time and space, and we were always cordial and polite, but like, I was like, I can't, like, to where, like, if friends were hosting a party and he was going to be there, I'd go earlier or he'd come later. Because I was like, it got to a point where, like, I couldn't even be in the same room with this person who, 2 years before that, everybody would have told you that you were crazy if Henry Buto was going to walk out of a room that this person's in simply because they're in. Like, you would have been like crazy. But it's after, a lot of work and two people walking toward each other. Like, last night was my birthday party and he was in the room. And, like, I invited him and his wife. And, like, we're now at a place to where that friendship will never probably be the intimacy it once was. But, like, it's healthy and it's thriving and growing again. And that's because it took two people. Versus I had a similar situation happen to another friend, and I'm trying to meet them halfway, whatever, but they're unwilling to move. And I finally had to like mourn that friendship and be like, and there was a peace that came with that when it was just like, I love myself more than I always say I love my peace more than I love anybody or anything else. I love my peace more than that. But I finally had to be like, oh, this is going to be painful. But my peace is worth more than that. Like, so, and it was, I don't know if that was encouraging or anything, but. Well,
I think that's really good. Cause I think building on both of what you guys were saying, like what you said, Henry, and what you said, Kristyn, is that whole thing of relationships takes two people. So if we don't see the other person putting intentionality into the relationship, into all of it, and there's something that my pastor talks about that, I'm not going to be able to say it as he does, but he talks about how there's one thing about what we believe. And really, we can have a relationship with people across whatever you believe, as long as you believe in the dignity of other people, But really, I can have a relationship with people no matter what you believe. But if how you believe it, how you live out your beliefs is not honoring, then even if if you can't live that belief out in an honoring way, then there's not going to be able to be a relationship. Kind of like going back to the questions, like you said, Kristyn, like if you can't also learn after a period of time of grace of how to ask those honoring questions back to me, then yeah, you're going to fall on the wheel into another place, into a different part of life. That's something really hard for me to learn, because I want, like you said, Kristyn, I want to have a relationship with everyone. I just want to be in all of these I aspire to be Henry Abudo in my life with the amount of social life that this man has. But
take it. It's exhausting.
But yeah, but I think there's something about that, not just what you believe, but how you believe it.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, Kristyn.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
This was so good. You just ask such good questions, and you
do.
You provide a safe space for people to share what they actually think. It's a real gift that you have, and I'm so thankful that you shared that with us today.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for the invitation. It was lovely hanging out with you all.
You are a light. Every time I get a text or an email from you, it brightens up my day.
I know. Oh my God, she texted me on my birthday, and it just like made my whole day. I was sitting there at brunch, and I was like, oh my goodness, that's so sweet. Yeah.
We have one more question before you go. We're asking every guest this. And
you're our final guest. We're asking this season.
I know, this is the final one.
Yes.
My goodness. If you could share a message with your younger self, you pick the age, what would you say?
Any age, up until yesterday.
Okay.
All will be well.
Huh.
All will be well. God's love is big enough to cover everything.
Okay.
My disappointments, the things I'm wrong about, my hopes, my dreams, my failures, all will be well.
Great. Awesome.
Good.
That's
Sure.
good. Yes. Tell that to my younger self too.
Tell that to me today.
Baby Grant, all will be well.
I need that right now. Okay.
Love it.
You can text me that every day.
That's a great note as we get ready to close out the season. Thank you, Kristyn, for joining us, and everyone listening. If you're going to be at Revoice, we can't wait to share our live episode with you all.
And I'll be at Revoice too. I can't wait to see everybody.
Talk to her about OTL. Talk to Kristyn about OTL.
Yes. If she doesn't leave with a list, tens deep of Side B people she can call upon for these OTL retreats. She's got
seriously.
Truly,
please, if you're listening,
fish in a barrel.
If you're listening to this, please talk to Kristyn about doing an Oriented to Love dialogue. You will not regret it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and we will talk to you soon.